Welcome back to another episode of Lost in the Farmer's Market Garden Shorts. In respects to things going on nationally, this episode will be a special one. 9 years ago on the blog I posted an article called Brothers in Arms, which shed a light on a piece of horticultural history that is definitely worth remembering. The plants being discussed today are a pair I often refer to as Brothers in Arms. And no, that's not cocoa and marijuana, though they do have a sordid history. In fact, it's a pair more common and overlooked. What I'm talking about is cotton and okra, which have been a part of American agriculture for more than a century at this point. But their origins in agriculture go even further back, and there's more history there than you know. There are a few plants that have such deep roots in slave trade and abolition, as well as genocide, subjugation, and rebellion as these two. Both cotton and okra are in the Malvaceae family, which is more commonly known as the mallow or hibiscus family. If there's any doubt of that fact, one would only need to see the flowers of either of these plants, and all doubts are cast aside. The scientific name of okra is Abelmoschus esculentus. Esculentus means edible, and thus far the meaning of Abelmoschus remains unclear, but this plant's seed pods are still a staple of southern cuisine. Okra isn't native to the Americas, and it arrived via New Orleans in roughly 1700. It is no surprise that okra caught on, as its foliage can be used as a medicine, its pods were used to thicken soups and stews, and its seeds could be roasted into a coffee substitute. Okra originates from Africa. The very name okra is a perversion of one of the original names for this agricultural favorite. Some of the original names for it are Okro, O-C-R-O, Guabo, Guagambo, Nagambo, and Nakuru. Nagambo is from the Bantu language of southern Africa, and may be the originating word for gumbo. The word Nakuru, in respect, was found to come from the Ashanti language of western Africa. I'm going to pause here for a moment just to state that I only have the spellings of these words and not a pronunciation key. So if any of you out there who speak native African languages and want to correct me on the pronunciation, I would greatly appreciate that. Well, the cultivation of okra developed enough to have become a major staple of Egypt for centuries before it was spread to the Far East and the European nations, and then finally the Americas. In terms of medicinal uses, okra is noted to have been used as a means of induced abortion by African slaves to prevent their children from being born in slavery. In the few states that allowed slaves to grow their own food, it has been said that the off-color okra varieties were left to them, while the more traditional green types were grown and sold by their owners as a cash crop. Interestingly, in my research, it turns out that one okra variety, called red burgundy, which is often labeled as an African-American heritage plant, isn't. It was actually developed by Leon Robbins at Clemson University in South Carolina in 1983, which kind of excludes it from the African-American heritage grouping. But I digress. You find these things out when you do the research sometimes. Now, we know cotton. If you think about how often it's represented in film and on television, if there's a scene that is shot that is supposed to be in the South, you're going to see a field of cotton somewhere in the background. What you see there is probably American upland cotton, which the scientific name for that is Gossypium hirsutum, hairy cotton. Everyone knows what the fluffy cotton bolls look like, and they look like little white clouds dangling off strange-looking plants that seem to lack good foliage, and you almost never see the flowers. Cotton, in respects, was a widespread plant grown in several differing continents and climates, but the original varieties brought to the Americas were probably Gossypium herbaceum, and it is thought to have originally been cultivated in Ethiopia or southern Arabia. Cotton is a major product of the southern American economy, especially during the Civil War, and became economically important with the mechanization of industry and the rise and expansion of slave labor in the Americas, just before the Civil War. The interesting thing about cotton is that during the American slave trade, slaves were prohibited from growing white lint cotton for themselves, since that was the prime cotton to be sold. Since white cotton was the major economic export, the slave owners plainly wanted to sell as much agricultural product as possible. The end result was that slaves were allowed to grow assorted colored lint varieties, such as Nankeen, Mississippi brown, and green lint types. The intentional disparity in which cotton to grow became a symbol of the slave trade in America and the systemic institution of racism. When it comes to harvesting of cotton, few realize how little effort it actually takes. When you see movies talking about this, they show the shell of the cotton boll being sharp and cutting into hands and stuff like that. That's not quite the truth. The cotton bolls themselves are easy enough to identify, but the plants tend to bear them low, which is interesting because it involved a lot of kneeling and, initially anyway. Late season, the cotton bolls start popping near the top of the plant. So the depiction is often in movies show a slightly skewed view of how cotton is picked. I digress there. The actual cotton pods from which the cotton fiber bursts were hardened off and had hard shells, which can make them easier to grab. But if you consider the heat of the southern sun and the humid weather during harvest time, harvesting cotton could be likened to a sampling of hell because of the long hours and stooping and bending and so forth. It is no wonder that the Anaconda Plan during the American Civil War was aimed at preventing supplies of cotton from getting to Europe. General Sherman's march to the sea wasn't coincidental in that light, By destroying thousands of tons of cotton, and of course even more in the way of property, his march financially broke the back of the Confederacy. Finally, it is important to note that on the medicinal front, some slaves were known to make a tonic of sorts from the roots of cotton in an attempt to induce an abortion, no doubt for the exact same reason I mentioned with okra. The harvesting of cotton may be one of the experiences a lot of gardeners could use, if only to get a feel for the weight of the history. When I say okra and cotton are brothers in arms, they may as well be. They are related and they have become opposite sides of the proverbial coin on which an entire nation's future has rested. Now, I admit that the aforementioned is unusually dark by Lost in the Farmer's Market standards, but American history is full of such things. Even in the field of agriculture, we are not exempt from unpleasantness. There are stories that would blow your mind, like the banana barons and other things like that. Now, for those still wishing to grow okra and cotton, here's how you do that. Both okra and cotton are easy to grow. They require well-drained soil and can tolerate a variety of nutrient issues and soil structure problems. Okra is more tolerant of poor soil, whereas cotton is a heavy feeder and will require fertilizer in most cases. The one thing neither tolerate is being constantly wet. Both get root or stem rot rapidly if they are kept too wet. Neither tolerates cold. However, both plants are transplant sensitive and may appear to stop growing briefly when transplanted. The truth is, both plants generally establish a heavy network of roots, and their top growth often lags behind. Cotton is an attractive plant once mature, as it forms a dense shrubby habit, and its mature leaves are glossy and lobed and resemble giant ivy leaves. The flower of cotton varies in color based on species, but it's always quite pretty and large in typical mallow fashion. Okra is strictly an upright plant with a conical shape, depending on variety and climate. Its height will generally top off at about 6 feet on the full-size varieties. Okra typically has deeply lobed leaves, as you can see, and okra flowers are no less attractive than cotton flowers, with the exception that they do seem to only come in a cheery butter yellow. The general time from flower to okra pod is usually about 3 days, and okra pods tend to be ready for picking in less than a week after the flower fades. Now, let's get into the fun part of this. What you see before you on the left is a baby Bubba okra plant. That is a dwarf okra that doesn't get full height but produces full-size pods. The red thing next to it, and we're going to zoom in a little bit here, that is a red foliated white lint cotton. Next to that, you have Mississippi brown, which It needs a rotation to be photogenic. I think we're gonna just turn that thing around. See the leaves? Yeah. By the way, here's a close-up of the red one. Very red. And then on the end, we have Orleans green lint. Now, this is not a plug. I've not been paid for this. I'm just doing this out, putting this out here. Baby Bubba comes from Burpee. I buy very few things from them because, you know, Burpee tends to be a bit pricey and not organic. The other 3 cotton types you see here, the 3 cotton tots, because there's only 3 types here, are all from Southern Exposure Seed. They're about $5 a packet. You get 20 seeds, and that's more than enough to produce a lot of cotton. Now, before I run out of battery, because this has been a very long episode, we're going to go outside for a minute. Okay. And we're going to see some okras. Alright. Let's start with that. This is what Baby Bubba will start to look like when it's really planted out and given nutrients. Okra, fed well, does well. Remember that Clemson spineless we were talking about? Not Clemson spineless. The red burgundy? This is my sole surviving red burgundy plant. And next to it are Baby Bubbas. But that's what they look like. As for cotton, we're going to go take a peek at some mature forms. And my, you sneaky little cotton. Look at this. This is red foliated. It really is red. And right there is a spent flower. And those little things, those wispy things in there, are actually the calyxes in which the cotton boll will form. Over here, we have Mississippi brown. Look at those leaves. They're wispy and neat. They're almost pomade. In fact, if they were serrated on the edge, someone might think they're an illegal herb. And lastly, and it's getting smacked by comfrey for some reason, this is Orleans green lint. I keep a specimen of each here just for demonstration purposes. And, as a final thought, I don't know if y'all can see this, but look at all those pollinators. There's so many. They're just crawling all over this. Oh my gosh. Well, that's all we have for today. If you like this episode, this special episode, and you want more ag history, let me know. Like, subscribe, hit up the blog, and leave comments. As always, folks, keep them growing.